All right, so I'm with Bobby Kleinschmit. Now, do you go by Robert or Bobby?
Yeah, Bobby's fine.
Okay. With obviously Emirates Team New Zealand, we're checking in different time zones. It's the start of the day there, end of the day here in Newport. And I understand you've been pretty involved with this AC40 that's been now sailing around for a couple of days. And well, I wanted to sort of bring Sailing World's readers and our audience up to speed on how the heck you got into such a cool job, and maybe you could take us behind the scenes of this 40. So without you've been at a very high level of design, I understand, for about 10-15 years, but give us a quick lowdown of where you came out of and how you've been able to grab a seat there in that Team New Zealand design powerhouse.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Michigan and studied naval architecture at Webb Institute, with the goal of basically designing racing sailboats and America's Cup boats. And actually, when I graduated from Webb, it was sort of the end of the IACC era. It was 2006, right before the 2007 America's Cup in Valencia. And I kind of thought that, while the America's Cup was cool, I kind of was more interested in really high performance boats like offshore racing multi-hulls and open 60s and that sort of thing. So I got a job with Morelli Melvin in California after Webb, and worked there for 4 or 5 years. While it was sort of a bit of a interesting time where multi-hulls kind of went from being pretty fringe to being quite mainstream, and going from some high performance cruising multi-hulls and things like that, right up to the working with Oracle on their big trimaran for the America's Cup in 2010, and then being really involved in writing the AC72 class rule. Basically, the start of kind of really high performance boats in the America's Cup, which is pretty cool. And after that, got hired through M&M to come down to New Zealand for the AC72 campaign. And after that, more or less never left. I spent a bit of time in France working with Guillaume Verdier on the Gitana trimaran and some of the Imoca boats in 2014, 2015. But pretty much been full-time here with Team New Zealand, trying to win the America's Cup for quite a while. So hired for the Bermuda campaign, and in 2015 kind of was sort of put in charge of the appendage design program leading up to the Bermuda Cup, which we won. And after that was straight into kind of coming up with concepts for the AC75, where obviously most of the world thought that 75-foot monohull for the America's Cup was going to be sort of back to something quite traditional. But I think a lot of other people, particularly on the team, thought that, foiling boats and high performance boats were really the way to go, and a lot more interesting in a lot of ways. And so I had a lot of fun coming up with basically the sort of global concept of the AC75. And then obviously into designing the boat, ultimately to race in the Cup last year in Auckland. So I was sort of the main hull designer, and again in charge of the sort of foil design program for the last campaign. And then now into campaign number 4 with Team New Zealand already, principal naval architect, and just still having a great time designing the boats. And this time around we've had a few other interesting projects with the hydrogen chase boat and the AC40 and a few other side projects and things like that. And just looking forward to the next one.
It's amazing. Well, you're surrounded by a lot of people, myself, gray-haired designers who have been in this for a long time. But that's amazing. You got into it right when it was going full speed acceleration mode, wasn't it?
Yeah. Somehow just been lucky enough to kind of end up working on some really super cool projects, and just kind of focusing on putting in as much effort as I can to do a good job, I guess.
I think you've done so far well. So a pretty good. The record stands for itself, I guess you could say. But you've been good so far.
yeah, we'll see. One cup at a time, one day at a time.
So you are part of how many design team these days that are currently for this next cycle?
Yeah, I mean, the design team is probably 25 people or something like that. And there's a huge focus on all the systems, particularly the hydraulics, electronics, mechanical systems, such as the foil flap control, the sail sheeting systems, obviously the hydraulic structures and software. There's a large number of software engineers on the team. And that basically means that the sort of naval architecture department is quite small compared to all of that. There's really just a huge amount of work that has to go into all of the complexity around the systems and everything, and also the modeling and analysis on the computer side, on the software side. Yeah, there's only well, there's basically me designing drawing shapes at the moment, and with a bit of support from a few of the other guys in the hull aerodynamics and the foil shapes areas. And yeah, so it's a big team, but there's a lot of guys that have been together now for a few campaigns, and so it's great that we all could just work together. We all know what needs to be done, and yeah, focus on doing a good job.
Yeah, it's amazing. You can design a beautiful, super efficient hull shape, but right, the mechatronics and the software, it's all got to work anyway. But otherwise, the beauty of your hull shape goes right out the window.
Yeah, I think there's definitely there's more hours put into all that kind of stuff than the hull shape ultimately at the end. So.
All right, before we get to some of the projects, and I know we can't talk about the next version, so we'll leave that. We'll have that there. And but there's plenty of going on. But before we want to get there, you said you were involved in some of the rules writing early on with the 72, which I can't imagine as a young guy sort of being like, when the average person reads the rules, you're like, man, it's sort of mind bending already. But like, how do you possibly write a set of rules knowing that every other team that enters this game is going to just nitpick the heck out of it, right?
Yeah, with the 72, it was interesting because it was obviously completely new. And in a lot of ways, it was kind of about writing rules that were sort of straightforward enough that you're not trying to anticipate what the boat is going to be in 3 years' time. It's like let's try to come up with some sort of fundamental restrictions and things like that. On the dimensions of the boat, the riding moment, and things like that, and a bit on the control side of things to make sure that the boats are competitive and that the teams can, have enough room to develop over the next 3 years, because we know the technology is going to go a long way. And once you start putting America's Cup level effort and funding into developing this type of boat. So it was kind of interesting because there were obviously huge leaps in development, even right through the racing during that America's Cup in 2013. But in the end, you ended up with two boats that were, pretty much the same speed in the end. One sort of started out a bit faster, and then the other one sort of caught up and passed it throughout this sort of 2 or 3 week period that the racing was going on. So yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, that's sort of obviously led on to the AC75 as well, with sort of a similar mindset of, well, we need to restrict all of the main parameters of the boat in terms of the riding moment, length, sail area, and things like that. But then leave some scope in terms of the hull shape, appendage shapes, and systems and things like that for development. And for the 75. Obviously, the whole game had advanced enough in terms of what people were able to do with simulation and with testing and things like that, and we sort of ended up with basically 4 boats that were all pretty similar in speed at various points in time. And sometimes you'd see one boat making some advances and sort of being the star for a little while, and then another one kind of catching up and passing it. So I think it's just been really good in terms of the competitive side of things to to see the technology evolve, but to still have really competitive racing.
I bet you could probably write a pretty killer book of sort of being involved with the development of both, two of the most aggressively different types of sailboats this sport has ever seen. It's pretty amazing.
Maybe. I don't know how many people would actually want to read it, but
oh, there's plenty of geeks out there. But so straight into this one here. You said there's a lot of side projects going on between the land. Did you have a hand in the land speed record as well?
not too much, no.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, that one's well, the guys are leaving later this week, really, to go over to Australia. So plenty happening there as well.
Yeah, cool. So with the AC40, that's what we're here to sort of dive into, right? I mean, how much, I guess, from a very basic level, is kind of a carry-on of the last campaign into this boat, or is this pretty much of a redo?
I'd say quite a lot is carry on. So the first thing after we won the cup last year was to evaluate the class rule. So there's a few changes on the naval architecture side. One being the weight. So taking off 3 people plus a lot of the extra sort of ballast carried on the deck, and a bit of the weight in the foil ballast and the platform as well. So the whole boat ends up nearly a ton lighter.
Wow.
And also changing the dimensions of the foils. So the foils are now longer span than they were before, which improves the efficiency, especially at low speed. So both the reduction in weight and increased foil span mean lower induced drag on the foils at low speed. So you should have a lot better performance in light wind, which was one of the main goals. And on the hull shape side, was basically it also, in terms of looking at improving the takeoff performance of the boat in light wind, some of the restrictions on the hull shape have been reduced a bit. So there's basically more freedom in terms of what you could do with the hull shape. So the AC40 is basically designed with all of those changes to the rule taken into account. So it has the longer span foil wings. It has basically a more aggressive hull shape for lighter takeoff and all those sort of things. So that, combined with basically looking at everyone else's boats and everything that we could have learned after the last America's Cup, kind of incorporating all those ideas into one sort of clean, good, all-around design that's going to be used for a lot of different things, and isn't really specifically focused to do one thing or one specific race, but just to be a good all-around boat that should work well in a wide range of wind conditions.
All right, cool. Well, let's drop in this video, I guess, that we've got. So this the boat launched, let's say Monday, last week, right? About this time last week.
Yep.
And I guess we'll roll it back to the beginning. So I think from a naval architect's point of view, I'll try to speed through and see a better view. But let me know if there you go. That's a better look at it. I mean, what are we looking at in terms of, like you're saying, a kind of a good, well-rounded shape? This one, seems to be flying pretty low and looks pretty forgiving and safe, but it looks really tiny there, at least. But what are we looking at? What's kind of some cool traits?
Yeah, on the hull shape side, the one of the big developments toward the end of last campaign was sort of trying to get the hull end plated to the water to stop the air rushing from the windward side to the leeward side underneath the boat. So, the boat has sort of a pretty straight rocker line forward, and then this skeg feature down the center line, which basically helps create the seal between the boat and the water. So that's something that all the teams ended up picking up on last time, and that's reflected here on this boat. And we also tried to reduce a lot of the volume in the hull forward, so that as you're sort of trying to punch through waves on this relatively small hull, or touching down at high speed, while you're foiling, then you sort of end up not picking up too much drag from the bow. And then the back of the boat, where the cockpits are and that sort of thing, is where you can pick up some stability as the boat heels over when it's in the water. And that's one of the areas where the new rule has a bit more freedom than the version 1 AC75 rule. So you're allowed to build a boat that's a little bit tippier, basically, and try to take advantage of a shape that has a bit of a narrower water plane when the boat's trying to accelerate to foiling when it's in the water.
You can see, I would go back to the skeg there, but was it the, if I remember right, the Italians were sort of the first to go pretty aggressive with that? So is this that's sort of that's their sort of input to this boat historically?
Yeah, I'm not sure at what point they sort of decided that they wanted to have that feature, maybe really early on, but it wasn't until sort of a bit after they had launched their boat too that they actually installed that on the boat. And it's something that we sort of discovered in in our development program, probably around the time that boat 1 went in the water or something like that. So the whole boat 2 development program was sort of based around that sort of idea, trying to improve that end plating and that seal between the boat and the water. And I think a lot of the other teams are probably on a similar sort of mindset, but then nobody really knew who was going to come out with it and when. So it was sort of we were thinking, oh, should we wait to stick it on the boat, or should we launch with it? Which ultimately on boat 2 on Te Rahutai, we did launch with it, and which I don't think anyone was too surprised about at the time, but you don't really know what anyone else is going to come out with up until really close to the end. So
that's the fun. Yeah. And so that is there a design name to that bow shape there? That's kind of a reverse chamfer, or what's the technical term for it? That the idea being that, right, is you're saying if you have a touchdown, you're not bearing a huge chunk of the front of the boat.
I mean, it's sort of, I guess, a little bit along the lines of like a trimaran center hull, where you've got a sort of that long skinny shape in the middle and quite a lot of flare in the bow, that sort of thing.
Okay. And when you have this 40 feet, again, this looks small relative to the chase boat, but how about the placement of the foils and the wings? I mean, where do you find, how do you balance that, the fore and aft, where you put all this stuff to make sure that it's got proper balance that way as well?
Yeah, good question. So the boat is, I mean, it's pretty much as close as you can get to a scaled down AC75. And we wanted to have kind of the best, most high performance boat that we could fit into the length restriction, which the boat's 11.8 meters long. There's 2 restrictions on the length. One is fitting it inside the length of a 40-foot shipping container,
right,
on a flat rack, and the other is the protocol, which says that you're not allowed to basically sail or test any boat that's more than 12 meters long, other than your AC75. So this boat is basically trying to replicate all of those relationships between the sails, the center of gravity, the foil position, the rudder, the beam of the boat, and all of that, as closely as possible to the AC75, except that what we've done is we've taken a 75 and then scaled it down to effectively what would be a 14-meter boat, and then chopped off a bit of bow and a bit of stern to make it 11.8 meters. So if you were to imagine the boat with an extra 1.5 meters out the bow and 0.5 meter out the transom, that would be basically an exact scale down of an AC75. But that sort of extra bit of hull, when you're foiling, isn't really necessary effectively. So the sort of, let's say the most high performance boat that you can fit in 12 meters is effectively this. It's a 14-meter version of an AC75 with the bow chopped off. So it's that also makes it a bit easier to achieve the weight targets and things like that, because the smaller the boat gets, the harder it is to hit that scale weight. Especially with the crew, the people don't really shrink down, and a lot of the components on the boat don't really shrink down. So yeah, it's basically just redesigning the hull to fit in that 11.8 meters instead of 14 meters, and off you go. And then, you know, so before the foil dimensions and things like that are based around the version 2 rule. So it's basically just a scale down of a version 275 foil at 14 meter scale.
That appears to be just razor flat. Is that kind of the net, that is that the universal safe shape?
Yeah, it's sort of I guess trying to keep it a little bit simple for the sort of manufacturing and one design side of things, but also just have a good shape that you know, is going to be, we wanted a foil that would be good at low speed for the light wind takeoff, and also at high speed with really good cavitation performance. So it's reasonably thin, still just kind of yeah, it's the hull just kind of good all around shape, not really too targeted to any specific conditions or anything like that.
In one design, I don't know if this is getting ahead of us, but once you get into the one design racing, and this is what I'm assuming would be a stock foil setup, what is the wind range that can be sailed in now?
Yeah, it looks like it should be say below 8 knots in terms of being able to take off on its own power, but it seems like you could really foil through a much lower wind speed than that. So, you know, provided you can get up and foiling, you should be able to be racing in 6.5 knots, something like that. You know, fully foiling, and yeah, all the way up until, you know, the sort of low 20s and that sort of thing.
Up to when things start to boil, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I'd say the top end speed should be pretty good, you know, high 40s, that sort of thing, based on the cavitation speed in the foils.
And so once you get down the bottom, you're sort of the tow assisted takeoff. So once you're up, and it all should be pretty easy in the light stuff.
Yeah, it seems, I mean, we've only had a couple days in the water so far, but sailing through some light patches and the light air maneuvers have been pretty good. And, you know, if you do touch the hull down for a little bit, doesn't pick up that much drag either, so you can sort of keep accelerating out of it most of the time.
Okay. And so you've got, obviously, the sails are all end plated to the deck, so, you know, and everybody's in their cockpit. There is no crossing the boat. This is set up for 4. What are the 4 sails inside the boat doing?
Yep, so there's 2 helmsmen. The wheels are at the front of the cockpit, and the helmsman's basically yeah, he's driving, and then he's got a set of buttons that control things like the foil cant, and the foil flap that controls the ride height. That's all done by the autopilot. The rudder rake to control the trim can also be done on the autopilot. But then the helmsman basically tells the autopilot how high he wants to fly or what trim angle he wants the boat set at. So he's got basically control over setting those targets. And then the guys in the back seats, they have all the self controls. So they're yeah, basically you know, the main sheet and the jib sheet, and then all of the sort of setup stuff with the camber and twist, and, you know, basically yeah, all the self controls, and you know, yeah, so that's pretty much it. In the maneuvers, there's plenty to do with yeah, and inverting the sails, and, you know, swapping rolls from side to side, and even in a straight line, you know, that say 4 sailors is kind of what you end up with on the 75 as well now, because you've got 8 people and 4 of which are the grinders or cyclers. So it sort of replicates that kind of crew dynamic as well, just without the grinder side of things.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, I'd say taking the foil flap and rudder rake out of it still leaves plenty to do in terms of just the normal sailing functions on the boat with the steering and trimming the sails and all that. Especially at this size, it's a very dynamic boat, and yeah, definitely pretty challenging to sail.
I bet there's sort of little go-kart steering wheels, or are they more slicked out? Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. It's sort of it's more like a Formula One cockpit or that sort of thing, where you're sort of in your bucket seat at the front of the cockpit with your legs underneath the wheel, and it's sort of a squared off wheel on the top and bottom. So you've got a kind of a dashboard in front of you with displays and buttons, and then I guess room to get your legs underneath. So you're not really doing hand over hand on the wheel or anything like that. You're just sort of steering it. More like an F1 car or something like that, with your hands sort of locked in position on the wheels.
Yeah, the turning radius is not traditional on this thing.
Yeah, it's a pretty geared up steering wheel, so not turning it very far, and the boat's spinning pretty fast.
And on the sails, are they the twin skinned, or what are we looking at? Yeah, okay. So there's quite a bit.
Yep. Yeah, it's basically you've got it's a full scaled down 75 rig with the twin skin, and the whole basically development of the whole sheeting system from Regattas. So it's the bullness setup with the main sheet ram kind of between the sail skins, and the curved traveler track recessed into the deck, so that all of that system's basically a direct development of Regattas. And as far as the jib goes, that's another change in the class rule, is that now you're allowed to have a self-tacker. You had to have a winch on either side in the 75 in the past. Now you'll be able to have a hydraulic jib sheet and a self-tacker, which this boat has as well.
That's amazing. How many adjustment points are in the main going top to bottom?
So it's just well, you've got the mass rotation, and then you've got the clue adjuster. So you basically have the the main sheet, which can kind of move back and forth on the clue to change your your sheeting angle, your relationship between twist and camber. And that's basically it. So there's no real control system inside the sail or anything like that.
Okay. So maybe just, if you could, like, what is mechanically and I guess automatically, software wise, is happening through attack? I mean, attack is essentially the same as a jibe now these days, right?
Yeah. Yep. So it's I guess the first thing is you still have the computer controlling the foil flaps on both sides. If you put the windward foil in the water, that'll be sort of balancing its ride out each foil individually on both sides. And then in terms of turning the boat, you've got to get the whole sail basically turned inside out. So the mass rotations and travelers got to go the other way. The jib will basically tack itself, and then you're sort of, I guess, changing modes with the sail to power the sail up coming out of the tack. Basically create the roll moment so that when you lift the windward board out, then the boat stays balanced. And obviously the windier it is, the kind of closer you can land on your target angle, and then if it's lighter, or to keep the boat speed up and keep the boat balanced and roll, you've got to come out of attack at a wider angle, or come out of a jibe at a hotter angle, kind of keep the boat going.
And how much of that is human input versus the autopilot coming out of the maneuvers?
It's basically all human input, other than the flap on the back of the foil, and a bit of the rudder rack. Sort of the only things that the autopilot's taking care of. So anything to do with the sail handling, and also putting the boards up and down, obviously steering and all that, is all on the human side. So there's definitely plenty to keep you busy.
There's still some buttons to press, basically.
Yeah.
And what's just my eye is drawn to play the recon game on the back of the clue of the main. What's that sort of cut out there? Is that just allowing you to change the sheeting angle, or what's going on there?
Yep. So that's the whole clue adjuster thing. So with the boomless setup, it's sort of, it's basically a combination of your sort of main sheet and outhaul kind of thing. So the main sheet sort of goes up through the sail, and then the whole thing can slide fore and aft. So similar to kind of a jib sheet track as well, sliding fore and aft. So if you move the main sheet to the back of the sail, then it's pulling more vertically, it's pulling down. So then it's going to be closing the leech and reducing the twists, but then also kind of increasing the foot camber. And then if you go the other way, slide the main sheet to the front of that track, then flatten out the bottom of the sail and increase the twist. So yeah, it works exactly the same as a jib fore and aft track on any other boat, but you can sort of adjust that live while you're sailing. So you've got the main sheet and then this clue position, or I guess outhaul if you want to call it that. And
cool.
then obviously the troubler.
Is there something similar on the jib to match the leech profiles or match the shapes?
Yep. So on the jib, you've got the side-to-side track, and then the sheet are sort of the main controls, really. So the sheet's sort of pulling more up and down.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Then what's the? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, there's no sort of clue adjuster thing or anything like that on the jib there.
Okay. Yeah, you're going old school there. And the hardware above the on the deck, is that just all the telemetry stuff and nothing special there?
Yep. So there's not much other than you've got the rudder tripod. So the rudder stock sort of comes up through that tripod in the back, and there's a pretty cool hydraulic ram sort of inside that pod thing, and then above that, that's just that's not really part of the one design boat. It's just a temporary mast for some antennas and things like that. Gotcha. And then on the front, on the bowsprit, we've got the wind wand and sonic ride height sensor built into the bowsprit.
And the deck, it's got that. It's almost reminds me of almost like some of the foredecks now with the Amoka 60s. Are you sort of it's reversed? That just down to keep the weight lower. What's the design concept there? The sunken deck, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah, one of the main things is actually to try to fare in the self-tacker track. So the track has to be sort of curved around the forestay, so it ends up a bit lower in the middle. So the whole foredeck is kind of drawn around kind of that sort of thing. And then after that, basically keeping both the main and the jib sealed. It's sort of a shape that the sails can kind of follow around side to side and stay stuck to the deck.
There's not a lot of boat back in that transom, is there?
Yeah, it's pretty low freeboard. So that's another change in the class rule, is basically getting rid of the runners. So we saw Little Rosa do some testing last campaign without runners, and that just getting rid of some of the weight and complexity of the systems and all that might be a good idea for the class. So this boat and the 75 now have no runners. So there's no structure basically back in those back corners of the boat, because there's nothing to, there's no load going through there really. So yeah, sort of pretty low freeboard. which is okay when the boat's in the air. And yeah, you end up, maybe if you were going to spend a whole lot of time sailing in the water with the boat heeled over a lot, you might want a bit more, but otherwise it's, yeah, just trying to make a nice aerodynamic shape and, you know, reduce the surface area back there.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's a beautiful shape. Were you responsible for the overall shape design? Or I know there's a team. Yeah, no, that's cool. Cool looking vessel, that's for sure. Quite wicked. So the so on the rudder you mentioned, so it comes up through a cassette. What are the adjustment points for that? What's happening with the rudder dynamically?
Yep. So it's it's basically got a sort of a car that has a built-in kind of hydraulic ram that moves fore and aft to control the rudder rake at the top bearing, and then at the bottom bearing there's just a pretty traditional quadrant with a cable system for the steering, and that's pretty much it for the rudder.
How do you dampen? I mean, imagine the motions on this boat at full speed are, you know, it's just a twitch that'll make the boat turn pretty quick. How do you sort of dampen the rudder movements and the reactions that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when the boat's when the boat's foiling, the rudder's about 2 meters long, but sort of, you know, you get a good portion of that out of the water most of the time. So
Yeah.
the area of what's in the water is pretty skinny and pretty small. So yeah, there's actually not a huge amount of feedback going back to the helm.
Okay.
You know, it's quite balanced and also, yeah, quite small. So even with 40 knots of water rushing over it, it's not particularly loaded, really.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, it makes sense. And what's the wingspan that's happening on the rudder?
Yep. So at the bottom, then you've got the elevator, which is you know, controlling the pitch of the boat. And then the autopilot can set the rudder rake basically to control that pitch. And but most of the time, that's fairly unloaded as well. It's kind of just there to yeah, to maintain the trim angle of the boat.
Cool. So on the first couple sailing days that you've had, what's it been like, sort of just managing the boat off the dock, getting it, you know, on the tow, and it's like any 75, it's not stable until it's moving, right? So what are some of the considerations to get this thing, you know, off the dock and sailing?
Yeah, so it's the towing's actually pretty easy, you know, because when you tow the boat, you can go 25 knots, no problem. You know, especially if you have the sails down, then if the foils will sort of, you know, the autopilot will be controlling the foil flap angle, and you can just cruise, and it's super stable and nice. And then I guess when you stop, the foils obviously go down underneath the boat, which helps give it some stability. Put the sails up, and then you know, we start going from the chase boat at 1 or 2 knots or something like that. It takes a few seconds to raise the foils up and get everything in sailing position. And then obviously the faster you go, the easier it is. So starting off at 1 or 2 knots, you know, the boat will end up quite heeled over, so it doesn't have a lot of form stability. You just got to kind of be patient and let the boat accelerate a little bit. But then once you get going, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 knots, the foil starts generating lift, and you know, because it's way out to leeward, then you get a lot of riding moment from the foil. So you know, by the time you hit 8, 9, 10 knots, then you know, the lift from the foil is coming on quite quickly. So then there's a mad rush to kind of sheet the sails on harder and harder as the boat accelerates and flattens out. And most of that sort of takeoff boat speed range, that sort of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 knots, the boat actually sails quite flat. So it's just sort of riding on that skinny underbody part of the hull and reducing drag. And you know, from that point on, the boat will accelerate very, very quickly from sort of 11 or 12 knots up to, you know, 22, 23 knots, that sort of thing.
Guess
So
they're
that sort
pretty
of,
quick.
yeah, that sort of slow part going from kind of 2 to 7 or 8 knots is not the kind of thing that really happens very often in a race either. So yeah, I'd say it's not really what the boat's optimized to do, I guess, but going from that sort of 10 knots and up, but yeah, it accelerates really, really fast.
Oh yeah. So the sweet window is at 10 and then it just takes off.
Yeah.
Just internally then, if you can just explain, I mean, imagine there's some pretty sophisticated hydraulics running throughout this thing and batteries. I mean, how is this all powered?
Yep. So you've got a few batteries basically that are running a electric motor that runs a hydraulic pump. So that's so the hydraulic power pack is basically powering all those functions on the boat. You know, whether it's the foil flaps, the foil cant, you've got the jib sheet, the main sheet, basically all that's hydraulic. So it's all running off that battery. But you know, the batteries, I don't think we've done a battery change on the water yet. Basically just lasts all day long. And yeah, I mean, all those systems and everything, particularly with a one design boat that's being built overseas, a bit outside the sort of normal team environment. You know, all those systems have to be super well thought out and super reliable, basically from day one. So it's been really impressive just to have the boat show up with you know, all the hydraulics and electrics and everything pretty much ready to go. And you know, you drop it in the water and do your checks and things like that, and you know, it all basically works straight out of the box, which is, say, probably not the norm in the America's Cup world. And yeah, it's just pretty impressive that all that's managed to come together.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I guess so this is in its one design state, right? At what are some of the components that other teams can use this boat for to explore possibilities for their 75s?
Yeah, so in the protocol and in the technical regulations for the class rules, you know, you're only allowed to build one new 75 for the whole campaign, and you're only allowed to basically build one set of foil wings to race with. So that's 3 foil wings. They all basically have to be the same. So all the development that all the teams will do over the campaign has to be done either on the AC40 or on a similar sort of 40-foot boat that they can design and build themselves. So, you know, and in that case, each team would only be allowed to build one boat of their own design. So then on the foils, you're allowed to build 4 test foils at this 40-foot scale. Whether you put them on a 40 or on your own boat, you're allowed to build 4 foils. So here with these one design foils, we have released to the teams the design of the interface between the foil arm and the foil wing. So they could be designing foils already to put on their 40. But again, that's only 4 foils for the campaign, and that's basically all the development that the teams will end up doing on the water. Then you can build one development rudder at 40 scale, and then a few sets of sails. So basically, you know, 4 mains and 10 jibs, something like that for the campaign. So you can develop your sails, your systems, your foils, rudder, all of that at 40 scale. And then once the campaign's over, then the AC40s will go into one design mode for the Women's and Youth America's Cup. And then also during the America's Cup World Series next year, the boats will all be in one design configuration. So all those custom development foil wings will come off, and the one design ones will go back on for those events.
which I suppose that leads me to my last question, because I imagine you have work to do. Your time is valuable at this point, right? Yeah, for the youth in the America's Cup, for the women's, you don't just jump into this boat and go for it. I mean, how do these younger teams get experiences in the simulator, or how do you get into this thing, and not wreck it?
Yeah, I think the simulator is going to be pretty important, and that's pretty important for our sailors as well. Basically, learning how to sail the boat before it goes in the water. Yeah, I'd say that taking the flight control part out of it will definitely make it more accessible for the women and youth, and potentially private owners if they are interested in buying the boat. And we've put a lot of effort into simulating the boat, and I'm not sure exactly how much that'll be available for those Youth America's Cup teams, for example, to use. But yeah, I think there's definitely going to be quite a bit of that.
There is no off-the-shelf stock simulator software so kids can play at home.
Not yet, but I guess we'll see what comes along in the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you say, for private owners, that does bring up kind of a whole nother thought process of access to simulators and really trying to learn how to sail a boat. Yeah, cool. Well, will you ever get a chance to go take a ride on your own weaponry here, you think?
Yeah, I guess at some point, although right now that's not really, the focus. There's plenty for the sailors to do and learn about and test on the water, and plenty for me to do in front of my computers.
Well, they should have employee sailing day, I think. So anyway, I'll let you go, get back to work, and I really appreciate your time. It's great to meet you, and it's nice to have sort of American an ace in the hole there, working with the team for so long. Such a big player, so good stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, well, yeah, it's great to talk to you, and yeah, thanks for that.
All right, so I guess we'll see you in Barcelona.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Cheers.